Hello everyone, I'm here again with another video. We're going to talk about Chapter 7 today. Chapter 7, as you can see over here, is all about forecasting methods and approaches. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff over here. We will be touching base with quantitative tools and methods for the forecasting, along with the qualitative forecasting methods and approaches. So, as you know, the first page of our lecture notes is the lecture outline. You can always follow excuse me, the layout of the lecture from the outline. I'm just going to go over the outline with you guys briefly, and then we will switch our attention to details of what we're going to talk today. I hope you guys are staying on top of everything. Please don't forget to check the course schedule. Please don't forget to turn the assignments on time or before the deadline. Any questions, of course, shoot me an email, and then I will be happy to answer your questions and discuss what's in your mind about the course. Guys, we're going to start with the importance of forecasting for the hospitality firms. Why forecasting is so much needed, why we need to follow forecasting techniques, why we need to implement some forecasting methods to come up with a clear picture of financial, operational, and strategic analysis. And then, of course, we're going to delve deeper into forecasting methods and approaches, what they are, the assumptions, the role, the usage, the purpose of those. We're going to be talking about all these in this class. As you can see right here, we have two of them. We classify them into two main categories. Qualitative forecasting right here. This is the first one. We will talk about the approaches and methods, and then on the last portion of the chapter, we'll be touching base with the quantitative approaches, which are mainly time series models and casual models, and we have 3 time series models along with 1 casual models, which is the regression analysis. We're going to be talking about all these, but again, of course, as we always do, yeah. So we will be talking about the importance of forecasting. We are going to be talking about the conceptual stuff about forecasting. Guys, forecasting, we know what it is. Everybody has an idea what forecasting is by book definition, by online sources, or any other sources. But again, forecasting is the use of historical financial data or operational data to come up with financial picture of the firms. It could be operations in terms of revenues and expenses. It could be forecast for, let's say, RevPAR, ADR. It could be forecast for liabilities. It could be forecast for the occupancy. It could be everything. Forecasting is just a huge umbrella that we can put everything in it. I would like to draw your attention over here. It says forecasting is typically done based on demand for the goods and products, of course. Why? Because demand is what drives the revenues and thus the profits. Therefore, forecasting for demand is very important. Again, of course, if you think about the lodging industry, guest demand to a hotel room becomes very important. Remember, we talked about the price elasticity of demand. It becomes critical in terms of forecasting as well, because we have to analyze our customers' demographic profile as well as financial profile to come up with or to label our customers as price sensitive or price insensitive. Then forecasting will be done as accurate as possible. Guys, let me tell you something. Take a look at this sentence over here. And there are a couple of hang on, just give me 1 second. There are many actually. There are many bullet points underneath. Guys, forecasting is not, I'm just underlining this, forecasting is not trying to find the actual number 100%, okay? Forecasting is a process along with the tools to get as close as possible to the actual outcome based on the historical data. Okay, so therefore forecasting is affected by many things in our industry. For example, market shutdowns and economic recessions. Economic recessions are the downturns in the macroeconomy, shrinking in GDP, for example, gross domestic products. Unexpected demand increase or decrease in unexpected demand for the goods and products or services for the hospitality companies. Fluctuations in consumer spending. Macroeconomic conditions, for example, interest rates, inflation, unemployment. consumer disposable income is affected by interest rates, inflation, it becomes very important because, as we know by now that if the macroeconomic conditions are not well, of course it's just cyclical patterns, they're all temporary, but if the macroeconomic conditions are not well in the country, consumers, the first area the consumers are going to cut in their budget, in their personal budget, is the travel expenses or vacation expenses. Therefore, if their disposable income shrinks, our industry will get affected a lot, negatively of course, because they just don't travel. It's simple as that. So forecasting is pervasive. It is used by management for different types of purposes. Forecasting is used to cope with uncertainty. Forecasting is trying to guess the uncertain events, trying to come up with a solution for the uncertain events, to determine the allocation of resources. For example, your next year, when I say as a decision maker or a director of a unit or a department, your next year's budget or your next year's asset allocation will depend on what's going to happen next year. What's going to happen next year is the forecasting. Therefore, we will determine the allocation of resources. For example, how much do we have to spend for marketing expenses, right? How much do we have to put for OTAs? Okay, how many rooms we can allocate, or what our expenses will be, so we can just reorganize our revenue stream along with the expenses. Also, forecasting is used to plan the most effective and efficient ways to increase or decrease and balance asset sales volume and revenues and the profit. So if we have an idea, I'm talking about forecasting. If we have an idea of what we might or we will most likely have in terms of revenues or generate revenues, we might have an idea about how much we can spend based on the forecasting outcomes. Again, guys, forecasting is never the 100% actual outcomes, but forecasting is the tool to come up with what's probable in the future. Therefore, there are tools and techniques for that, and as a decision maker, we want to use forecasting to get as close as possible to an actual outcome based on historical data. Okay. So forecasting also provides benchmarks. This is the usage of forecasting tools and approaches. Forecasting is also used to provide benchmarks, standards, thresholds for the hospitality companies. For example, break-even analysis. 40% occupancy will be at the break-even analysis, and if you forecasted 42%, for the internal operations, 40 to 45% range, let's say, I'm just giving an example, made up numbers, 40 to 45% can be our benchmark for the break-even in terms of occupancies. Therefore, forecasting helps the managers to decide the benchmarks, come up with the benchmarks, or create the standards, for example, labor as well, create the standards in the internal operations. As every procedure, quantitative procedure, forecasting and forecasting has assumptions, has limitations, so on and so forth. Time becomes a significant factor in the forecasting. Why? Because take a look at this here. The more remote the forecasting period is from the date the forecast is made, the greater the difficulty in making the forecast and the greater the risk that the actual results will differ from the forecast. Meaning, guys, if you are trying to forecast what's going to happen 10 years versus what's going to happen next year, okay, it has different implications because of time. Why? Time is an important factor. So what might happen in the future, let's in terms of ADR or occupancy percentage, for example, in 10 years versus next year is different. Next year is easier to forecast because we know what might happen based on the historical data. Maybe there won't be any significant changes in the local competition, local economy, or macroeconomy, or global tourist patterns or global traveler patterns. But in 10 years, it is hard to say that. Why? Because everything can change in 10 years. Take a look at 10 years ago. we didn't have many options for, let's say, smartphones, but now we have a lot of options using our apps to book the travels, right? For consumers, yes, 10 years ago they existed, but not that extensive level. So those are the stuff that I'm talking about. So we don't know what's going to happen. Therefore, trying to forecast closer terms or shorter terms, a year, 2 years, next 6 months, next month, next quarter, next period, becomes easier than just trying to forecast what might happen, what you might have in terms of your operations in 10 years or 20 years or 15 years. It is difficult, guys. That's exactly what it is. Therefore, time has an important effect on forecasting. And of course, forecasting involves uncertainty. Guys, everything is uncertain. Therefore, we don't know what's going to happen. We are trying to come up with the best scenario for the next year, for the next period, using the forecasting, because as you know, everything becomes uncertain. So in forecasting, we are dealing with uncertainty, okay? Therefore, we are trying to come up with a robust structure when dealing with uncertainty. Forecasts are generally less accurate than the actual occurrences, of course. The thing is, for example, this is the actual occurrence, and this is our forecasting right here. We might want to get as close as possible to an actual data or to actual events, actual occurrences, because if you forecast something here, for example, ADR, if you forecast ADR here and it's so far away from the actual outcome, then your forecasting assumptions or limitations or forecasting procedures are wrong. That's why we would like to be as close as to actual outcome, so we know we will have a great idea about the financial framework for the next period when, based on our forecasting. All right. That's important right here. If a forecasting method or approach is much less than desired and yields very inaccurate results, that's what I'm talking about right now, or if your forecast is so far away from the actual outcome, you might want to change something in your forecasting assumptions. You might want to be more realistic, maybe more conservative, and of course it depends on type of the hospitality establishment you're directing, you're managing, location, demand, consumer traffic, and a whole bunch of stuff. But again, if you are way off in your forecasting assumptions must be recreated to come up with a robust forecasting outcomes. All right, guys? Forecasting generally relies on the information contained in the historical financial operational data. Of course, you're going to take a look at the history. Well, people say history repeats itself. May or may not be true, but historical data becomes a great source for forecasting, because a revenue analyst or financial analyst in the hospitality companies usually go back what happened in the past and then try to come up with a framework for the next period. So that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to be using historical data in our calculations when we get to the point, and then we are going to do some methods, apply some formulas to come up with what might happen in the future, and then try to draw managerial implications based on what might happen in the future, guys. This is exactly what we're going to do, okay? What kind of historical data I'm talking about? I'm talking about the historical activity in sales, in occupants percentages, customer traffic, guests, RevPAC, RevPAR. We are talking about that. One last thing I want to talk about before we get to the forecasting methods and approaches, guys. In forecasting, constant revision is strictly needed. Why? Because new data comes in every day, every hour, every time of, every different time, morning, afternoon, different time of the day. When new data comes in, your forecasting assumptions will constantly change, because new data becomes an historical data immediately. New data becomes a historical data, and additional new data comes in. Therefore, the new data will tell you something, or new actual data, let me just put it that way. New actual data will tell you something about, will tell you everything about actually what's going on in your internal operations. Therefore, constant revision is needed, because this is how managers how the managers should approach to forecasting, because managers would like to factor the new data in their equations. That's why constant revision becomes critical in forecasting, and it's strictly needed for the operations by decision makers. Oops, okay. Guys, what we're going to do right now, we're going to talk about forecasting methods and approaches. We have two main forecasting methods and approaches. One of them is qualitative. The other one is quantitative, okay? I'm going to define them. I'm going to talk about them. So guys, qualitative approaches is non-numerical. Qualitative approaches are non-numerical approaches in forecasting. And on the other hand, quantitative forecasting is the numerical or the forecasting based on the numbers. So it deals with equations here, it deals with formulas, and it deals with procedures we are over here, okay? Guys, let me see something real quick. I will get back to this. Okay, so in real life, managers usually rely on their instincts, okay? And then rely on their managerial expertise or the background and everything, which is not a wrong approach. However, it might not give you the full picture of what might happen in the future in the forecasting. So, if the managers rely on their instincts, it's called implicit forecasting. Okay. However, if the managers rely solely on the numbers, the quantitative approaches, it is called explicit forecasting. So implicit forecasting indicates the procedures or tools for qualitative approaches, and explicit forecasting is the quantitative approaches. We know now what they are: qualitative, non-numerical approaches; quantitative, the numerical approaches. It is the quantitative approaches based on. They are based on the tools and numerical equations and formulas. Excuse me. Excuse me. So, guys, again, take a look at over here. Again, managers usually rely on their experience, background, which is not a bad idea to do that, because 20 plus, 25 plus, 25 plus year managerial experience will tell you a lot. Okay. However, I think the best way of forecasting is to combine implicit forecasting with the explicit forecasting. In other words, the best way of the best approach to forecasting is to combine your instincts, your gut feelings, depending on your professional experiences, along with what numbers tell you, which is the quantitative forecasting, is the best way of doing forecasting, because you will take a look at the numbers, you will be able to interpret what numbers tell you, and then you're going to combine them with your experience to come up with the best forecasting assumptions. That way your forecasting will be robust, it will be thorough, and then your forecasting results will be as close as to and actual data will happen in the future. Okay, guys? If you take a look at it over here, we're going to start with the forecasting tools and approaches right now. The first category is the qualitative forecasting or implicit forecasting. We know that qualitative forecasting and methods and approaches become very useful when the limitations of quantitative approaches significantly affect the hospitality operations when the financial data is not available. For example, if you're a startup company, brand new company, if you're working for a giant multinational hospitality corporation, and then you are responsible as a decision maker, if you're responsible of the new investments, new hotel properties or restaurant properties or theme park properties or theme parks, you don't have the data, okay? Usually your instincts, managerial instincts and professional experiences work the best, okay? This is usually for the new investment startups or, a brand new initiation of hospitality operations, okay? The qualitative methods and approaches, they are subjective and they are entirely based on management judgments, okay? Hands-on experience, professional experience, and managerial background. So what are they? Market research is one of the best qualitative approach that the managers utilize to come up with the forecasting assumptions or forecasting procedures. It involves systematically gathering and recording and analyzing data through surveys. questionnaires, through focus groups, through approaching the customers and to, to ask them how their experiences were. This is called market research. It's just trying to analyze the voice of the local market along with the broader market. Okay, so it's a great way of analyzing your customers' wishes and wants, and then your forecasting will be easier and based on their input. Executive experience and opinions. As a decision maker, as I said, if you have, let's say, 20 plus year of experience or 25 plus year experience, it becomes critical. It becomes very essential because you know the area very well, you know the local market very well, you know the competition very well. Therefore, you can factor that in your forecasting assumptions to come up with a great forecasting procedures. The Salesforce Composite is based on the opinions of corporate sales personnel. Again, they are related to each other. Okay, each salesperson estimates sales in his or her region, and then come up with a forecasting by putting their inputs. That's why Sales Market Force Composite becomes important. So they gather the data together, okay, and then they analyze the data. Delphi technique, again, questionnaire, surveys, polls, utilized to gather opinions, or the reviews, or the focus groups. But again, these are everything is done to gather information from people's experiences, travelers' experiences. Okay, so guys, these are the qualitative approaches. We have 4 different techniques: market research, Delphi technique, Salesforce Composite, and professional experience becomes the 4 different tools that managers usually approach and utilize for the qualitative techniques. Okay. Quantitative methods, they are the ones utilizes numbers, utilizes historical data, utilizes certain approaches. 2 main categories of mathematical forecasting techniques we have in this quantitative forecasting. They are A, time series historical data analysis, B, casual or associative analysis, and then we're going to start with the time series methods first. Guys, in time series methods, we have 3 different forecasting approaches: naive models, okay, exponential smoothing, and moving average. This will change in the sequence, okay? So naive models, exponential smoothing, and the moving average, they are the time series approaches for forecasting, and then we are going to start with the naive models right now. Before I start, let me just talk about time series models, guys. Why they call those approaches time series models? Because those approaches, naive models, moving averages, and exponential smoothing, they include time, okay? They include different time frames or different time periods based on the historical data in their equations and in the calculation procedures, estimation procedures. That is why they are called time series models. And again, the first one we know, they are the naive models. Naive models are so naive. They're literally so naive because they are the most restricted models. It is the most restricted model we have in the forecasting. It has a lot of limitations. It has a lot of limitations and restrictions. That's why it is the simplest time series model we have in the entire forecasting tools and approaches. Because naive models, they have very simple rules and they provide reasonably accurate forecasts. However, it is great to use naive models for the forecasting which is done for up to a year. Okay, more than a year, maybe some other models will be better. Some other complex models will be better because naive models. I will show you the main equations right now. Naive models are only deal with the base period and the change in the forecasting assumptions. Guys, forecasting assumptions is done by decision maker. Okay, for example, this could, in the naive model, this could be a great forecasting assumption. In 2018, the sales was $100. Now, the forecasting assumption tells us that for 2019, our sales will be increased by 10%. Therefore, it will be $110, let's say. So naive models deals with the base period, which is the base period over here. I will define them in a second. Let me just change my marker. Deals with the base period and the forecasting assumption, which is 10% in this case, to come up with the forecasting for 2019. Therefore, take a look at the main equation. You will see what I'm talking about. There are two different equations in. There are two different forecasting equations for the naive models, okay? But still, they include base period and the forecasting assumption. Guys, if and when there is an increase in the forecast, for example, let's go back to our example, let's say 10% increase, you are assuming that will happen in the future, your main equation for the naive models will be forecast, which is equal to base period multiplied by 1 plus x. Guys, x over here is the change in the given variable, which is in this case, it is 10%, okay? We will see examples in a second. And then the base period is the immediate past period, meaning in our case, 2018 and 19, it was the 2018. On the other hand, if you expect a decrease in your forecast, let's say 5% decrease for 2019, okay? Your forecast will be equal to base period multiplied by 1 minus x. Again, x is the forecasting assumption, in this case 5% decrease. All right, and the base period will be the immediate past period that we just talked about. So these are the equations for the naive models. And then let's take a look at the example. And then let's just deal with a forecasting procedure, forecasting estimations done with the naive models, guys. Okay, take a look. Hyatt Inn is an economy hotel. Good. The hotel's room revenue was $200,000 in March. Time is important in forecasting, remember that. The managerial projections for April, look, it's March right here. We are trying to come up with the values for April. Good. The managerial projections for April show that the room revenue will be most likely increased by 10%. So we are talking about the room revenues over here, and most likely from March to April, forecasting assumptions tell that there will be most likely be a 10% increase in the revenues. Therefore, based on the managerial projections, these are the forecasting assumptions, which is 10%. What is the forecasted room revenue for April for Hyatt Inn? We are trying to find that over here because we have $200,000 base period. So again, what is my base period, which is the March immediate past period? What is my x, which is the forecasting assumption? It is 10%. And take a look at the solution, guys. Take a look at the solution. Let me just clean the table, the screen real quick. Take a look at the solution. I know that there will be increase of 10%. By 10%, therefore, I will have to use this equation right here, which means base period multiplied by 1 plus x. X is my 10%, which is the forecasting assumption, and base period, which is March, which is also given. Therefore, when I plug in the numbers, it will be just like this. Look, $200,000 multiplied by 1 plus 10. 1 plus 10 is equal to 1.10. Therefore, $200,000 multiplied by 1.10, which will be equal to $220,000. Which is the result. Therefore, the projected room revenues will be most likely around $220,000 for in April for Hyatt Inn. Very basic, very simple, but it gives you a great idea because for example, for the fixed cost like wages and salaries or the lease expenses, it will give you a great idea that how much you need to spend in your forecasting because they are just so fixed, and then you can easily forecast them because there won't be zero change. Okay, or food cost, for example, if you're planning to increase your food cost by 5%, you can easily do the base period multiplied by 1 plus x. You can find out. Okay, so how about, here's another example. How about we have two base periods combined in one situation? Okay, take a look at the Gordon Hotel. You will see what I'm talking about. Let me just scroll down a little bit so you can see the question. Cool. So let's just analyze the situation for the Gordon Hotel, and then let's see what's happening over here, and then let's try to forecast their room sales. The Gordon Hotel's total revenue is generated from its room and F&B operations. Cool. Suppose that the total revenue generated by the room sales was $110,000 in August, and total revenue generated by F&B product sales was $90,000. So in August right here, we have RS, let's say room sales, how much? $110,000. It is always a good idea to list the information so you can visualize the question. It will be easier for you to solve for the question. And then F&B, let's put F&B over here. It was 90 grand in August. Great. That's what we have so far. The management of this hotel forecasted that there will be 10% increase in room revenues, okay, from August to, I assume, September. Great. September right here, guys. There will be 10% increase in room revenues, okay, but 7% decrease in F&B revenues. Look, there are two different assumptions right now. I have two different forecasting assumptions. One of them is the increase, the other one is the decrease, F&B revenues and room revenues. Therefore, what I'm trying to find out is that the total room revenue, well, guys, excuse me, there's a typo in the question. Total revenue for Gordon Hotel, meaning room revenues plus F&B. This will be the TR, total revenue. I'm trying to find out over here, guys, okay? So please excuse me, I apologize for the typo. We are trying to find out the total room revenue. So what am I gonna do, guys? Take a look at my solution. If you have more than two forecasting assumptions just like this, one of them is 10% increase, the other one is 10% decrease, all we have to do, we will have to combine them together, okay? We are going to combine these two together in our forecasting assumptions. Take a look at my combined equation then. My forecast will be in brackets, base period multiplied by 1 plus x. This is for the room revenues. Plus, I'm combining them right now, base period multiplied by 1 minus x. This is for the F&B revenue. Therefore, let's plug in the numbers. For room revenue, $110,000 base period revenue plus 10% increase, great. Plus, for the F&B revenues, 90 grand over here, minus 7% decrease, 0.93 here, 1.10 over here. Therefore, when I do the math, guys, I will have 204,700 because it was $200,000. Take a look here before the forecast, $200,000. With this forecast, I will have 204,700 forecasted total revenue in September. Clearly, there is an increase of $4,700 in my forecasting. Therefore, the Gordon Hotel is expecting this increase based on these two different forecasting assumptions, guys.